Hello! We are live. Welcome back to Hot Girl Book Club, Hot Dog Book Club. I'm drinking wine, don't worry about a thing. And today we are discussing Beasts of a Little Land with my good friend. Oh, look at that. Wow. My good friend and pal, Nicolee from Bonbon Reads, who reads
Hello.
a lot more historical fiction, I think, than I do. So if you want to introduce yourself a little bit or talk about your reading taste, we'll start there.
Okay. Hi, I'm Nicole from Bonbon Reads, and I read mostly fantasy and historical fiction, and I've been trying to get a little bit more into graphic novels and romance recently.
Nice. And as far as Beast of a Little Land, let's just get into it. What
Okay.
did you think?
Um, so I rated it at 4.5 stars, which is a pretty high ranking for me. I'm trying to get better with my rating system because I feel like when I joined BookTube, I was constantly giving books just fours and fives, and then I would never rate books under that. But anyways, I decided to give it a 4.5 star, which is a good rating. I had no complaints about it. I thought the writing was super lush, and I really liked the character development and just the overall, historical representation that we got throughout the story.
Yes, I completely agree. It did not feel like it was a debut. Like I'm blown
No.
away that this is like the author's first book. It did yeah, it felt lush and so thought out and so well researched that I was amazed. Like how is this possibly your first book? Um, I gave this 5 stars. I was in between 4 and 5 stars, and I was like, "Fuck it! Like it deserves the five." So I sent it on the 5 stars
That's
because I was reading
awesome.
it and was like, "Wow!" Like it lived in my mind when I wasn't reading it. Uh, what did you think of the first 100 pages?
I'm trying to remember what that is. I think that in the first chapter, it was a little confusing for me because I was just getting introduced to the characters. But as it progresses, I think in the first 100 pages, you learn about Jade, right? So that's when you
Yeah,
start meeting her, and that's when you learn about Kim Sung Soo and Lee Myung Bo. Um, Yeah, that was really interesting to me. I'm trying to kind of rehash. Um, what
just
did you
because
think?
well, I wasn't sure where it was going because the whole prequel or a prologue or whatever is about the hunter who's in the mountains, and then there's a tiger, and then he thinks he's gonna die, and that it was like, what is this? What's going on? And then that ended up being such a setup, almost like a metaphor for the rest of the book. And then I was reflecting on that prologue so often over the course of the book.
Mm,
Um, but yeah, and then the rest of it is Jade being sold to the school and then moving to Seoul with Luna and Lotus, and then her living with Danny in Seoul was kind of the setup for the story.
okay, yeah. I just remember, first of all, feeling a little bit upset in the beginning with just how the Japanese generals were talking about the Korean civilians that
Yeah.
were that was very hard for me to read, and we can get more into that later, but I actually have a personal story with Japanese occupation that I would like to share later on that involves my family's experience. But anyways, I felt that that was really interesting as well, the lead up, and I really liked how, you know, all of these characters are so intertwined, but in the first 100 pages, you have no idea how their stories are going to overlap. And it was just fun kind of realizing throughout the story how certain objects that were passed from person to person ended up coming full circle and impacting other people's lives in profound ways.
Yes, I may or may not be muting because Sunday is finally now eating her breakfast as she does. So if you hear any like crunchy munchies, that's my dog being extra.
It's an
but yes, like
ambiance.
the right, that's the vibe at this point. Even yes, trying to join the conversation. She is the queen of the show. This is Sunday 7 pages actually. But yes, what you said about how like we learn about all these characters and it's like, okay, like why do we care about this person? Who is this person? And then at the end, I don't remember whose POV or like who even is talking about this, but they bring up this like concept of like inyan, which is like how everyone is like tied together, like the threads of fate, or like how everyone is like connected. And then after that was like explained at the end, that I had this like click moment of like, oh, that's the point of the book. It's like we're all connected, everything comes back, like the little objects like the cigarette case and the silver ring and all those things. That was like the like chills moment of the book.
Yeah, I thought that was absolutely beautiful. So, was the silver ring that Jung Ho was carrying around that his father kind of passed on to him, was that the ring that Silver gave away that belongs to her lover?
I was confused about that too because I was like maybe they were like the same ring, but it felt like it was made to be such a point that like Silver had that ring and then Chung Ho had that ring, and it
Yeah.
was like, okay, why it has to be the same one, right? Or like the two like matching rings. Like there's definitely something there. If someone like okay, it was. Yeah, because I remember thinking like, okay, that can't just be like a coincidence. But at the
Right.
same time, I'm like, I was trying to do the timeline in my head of like, was that the timeline when she would have given it away? Like, but yeah, if that is the same ring, according to Brooke, then that is like a really cool little piece of that.
Yeah, it was really interesting to me because that part was never made clear. Like, I feel like with the cigarette case, there was just a moment where it was revealed and the story kind of came back to the beginning. But for the silver ring, like, you just see Jung Ho fighting the other orphans in the streets to protect the silver ring that his dad passed down to him. And I believe that he thought it was probably from his mother, but I was just kind of confused about that, but I do think that it was Silver's ring because it made
Oh my
that
gosh,
inyan.
yeah. Yeah, you're so right. That's probably why I was like, oh, there's got to be two rings because the way that he talked about it was like, oh, it was like under my father's pillow, like it must have been my mother's.
Yeah.
You're totally right. I'm just now like putting that together. Yes. Wow. What else were examples of that? It was like the ring, the cigarette case, and I feel like there was a couple examples with Jade. I feel like it'll come to me.
Yeah. I feel like there's so much to unpack with this story. It's kind of hard sometimes to think of everything on the spot.
Where do you want to start? I know we both made lists, so pick something you want to talk about, or anyone that is following along with us. That's something you really want to talk about. Oh, the rock. Yes, the green rock that he threw over to try to be like, hey, I'm
Oh,
outside.
yeah.
And then decades later, she's like, oh, I kept this green one. Yeah. Thank you, Brooke.
So that actually leads into what I want to talk about next. Just the romance arc throughout this story, like unrequited love. How was that for you? Because for me, the romance, it hurt a little bit. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah.
Specifically, I think that I was the most invested in Jung Ho and Jade's relationship, and it kind of killed me inside that he believed that she would only want to be with him if he was rich. And so he goes on this whole quest to get money easy. And meanwhile, she ends up falling in love with someone who is not wealthy at all. And just like that moment when he realizes that he didn't have to go through
Yeah.
all of that for her. That hurt. But Jade and Hunchol, I might be saying the name wrong. I did not get as invested in their storyline. I feel like their romance arc lasted for maybe a chapter and then it started going downhill. So I didn't feel as invested in that part of it.
Yeah, I think I felt for Jade more than I felt for like their relationship, because she clearly was like, I want to be with you. I will pay for you to go to university. Like they had like this whole relationship, and then he turned into this like social climber and was like, oh, I was born from like a good family, even though my family didn't have money, but I want to go to school, and so I have to marry someone from a good family to like continue to elevate my status, and like that's not you because you're a courtesan. And Jade was like, okay, cool. And so then like he went on to become like a super rich like automobile engineer basically. And it was like the irony was not lost on me of like Jade and like, because the two of those guys felt so opposite, like Hunchol and Jungho. It was like they both started poor and both wanted to be with Jade, and then one of them left her when he got too rich for her, and the other got rich and was like, we could be together now. And Jade was like,
Yeah, I completely agree. It was so frustrating to me that Henchol just wanted to kind of accept all of the credit for his accomplishments without taking a moment to think about how he would not be there if it weren't for her. And that kind of leads into my other point about how there was just so much sexism throughout the
oh
story,
yeah.
about how, a worthwhile woman was seen between the age of 16 through 24, and that's at her peak, and how they were just kind of objectified and only seen as worthwhile if they were completely pure and subservient and docile. And that was just, it was really hard to read, but also, I feel like it's very historically accurate, like at how women were perceived back then and how they were treated. Because I feel like sexism still goes on in certain Asian countries, as well as the
Right.
world. But it was just really frustrating to read about and quite sad.
Yeah, like I'm trying to think of like one of the examples that stuck out to me was kind of towards the end, maybe like the middle, where Luna is like called into her daughter's school for like a meeting, and the principal makes this whole point to be like, oh, that's like so and so's mom, like she's a courtesan. And the other person who's like in the meeting is like, oh, but you're like too pretty to work, but you'd probably be a good worker because like women are easier, you could pay them less and they're more obedient. Would do like, you should work for me. And I was reading that like, wow, that sucks, like to just like say out loud like that. But yeah, that
Yeah,
was how it went.
I completely agree. And just kind of the dynamic between how like courtesans are treated in general and the relationship between General Ito and Jade. That was
Yeah,
just the
that was hard to
audacity.
read. Yeah, especially how she kept like bumping into him over the decades, and him just being like, oh, I know we like had a history, and she's like, yeah, I hate you, like you're horrible. And him just like brushing it off like, oh, that's like, it was just normally how he treated all women, not just Jade.
Yeah. And that's what he talks about kind of at one point. I think it was when she was a bit older, so like in her 30s, but he was saying how he doesn't usually think of women after he tries to pursue them
Oh
once,
yeah.
but
Yeah.
she was one that he came back to, and she should essentially feel flattered because of that
Right.
attention.
And she was like, thanks, cool. Like, you're still a
Yeah,
scumbag.
exactly. So that was something that was really interesting to me. throughout the storyline.
Yeah. What did you think of the other two girls, like,
Luna and
lives? There
Lotus.
was Luna and Lotus, yeah.
I thought it was really interesting because they had a huge character dynamic change throughout the story. So I
Yeah.
thought it was kind of going to go one way where Luna was just going to continue being kind of bratty, headstrong, spoiled, and just kind of rude and a bully to her younger sister. But
Mm-hmm.
it was really hard to read those pages, and I think I actually texted you
Uh,
about that.
oh, you did, yeah.
But after she is assaulted, she drastically changes, and that was really hard to read about. But it was really interesting how she chose to become a like pure type of courtesan where she wouldn't do anything, but people would still pay money to sit next to her and have her accompany them. And that's because she didn't want to taint her daughter's life, which was
Mm-hmm.
also very sad. But I think that she definitely had a dynamic character change and that she became completely focused and devoted to her daughter. And I thought that was beautiful in a sense, like reading about their relationship, the mother and daughter, and how they would play together, and how in the end she ended up going to America to try and have her daughter have a better life.
Yeah, it was like I ended up really like rooting for Luna. Like she was kind of like had this like quiet, like you say, she was like a model, or like would spend time with people that would pay for it, but not in like how other courtesans would, like Lotus and Jade. And she was always kind of like in the background, but
Mm-hmm.
still felt very present to me because they would always like talk about her and their like family, like living with her aunt and like in their house all together. Even like when she was giving birth and like her friend came and was like, Aunt Danny isn't here, like you have to go and get things so that Luna doesn't die like having her baby. And then that was something they talked about over the years, is like, you're one of my oldest friends, like Luna would be dead if you hadn't been there.
Mm-hmm.
Such an accurate portrayal of men. Yes. Um, in all of the worst ways.
Yeah. The audacity and the entitlement.
Yeah.
Um, Love the complicated dynamics between the women. I agree. And so I guess leading into that, we can talk about Lotus and I guess her interesting kind of competitive dynamic with Jade. That was really interesting to
Mm-hmm.
me because I don't feel that Jade ever really viewed her in a competitive light. But because Lotus kind of compared herself to her and her success with Jade, it kind of tainted and made the relationship a bit more strained until, you know, the end where she got married and stuff like that. But it was very interesting because I feel like Lotus was just so full of life and energetic. And as she got older, she started comparing herself a little bit more to Jade. And I feel like that's kind of
Yeah.
inevitable in that kind of situation when you are literally making money based on what people think you're worth. So I
Right.
feel like that would definitely taint your self-image. And I think her story arc was kind of sad with her
Yeah.
husband. Or was she ever married to him? Or was she
No,
just the
she
mistress?
became, yeah, he asked her to be like his official mistress and like got her a house and her own maid, like away from her aunt's house. But they were never married. And after she had their child and it wasn't a boy, he like dropped her, which is
It was,
when then she got addicted to opium.
and that was really sad when she went missing and no one knew where she was and they ended up finding her afterwards. I'm happy at least though that she was able to go to Luna. And I hope that everything worked out then, but I think there was something in there that said that no one knew at the time what she was going to have to deal with when she went to the US. Like, do you
Yeah.
remember reading that paragraph where she thought that all of her nicest clothes were going to be the style over there? And So I hope everything worked out well, but
I know. And that was like my one, like the whole thing with Lotus. It felt like, okay, they found her, she's going to Luna. And then that felt very like wrapped up really quick, where it was like, wait, okay, okay, I guess that's it.
yeah,
But
I
yeah, I thought
agree.
for sure they would like, I thought that was just going to be like an open mystery. Like she went missing, maybe dead, like who knows. And so that was like a surprise, but then also it was like a tease. Like, wait, I want more information.
I know, because she doesn't talk about it at all. It's just they found her. She doesn't really talk about her life in between those years. And then she just kind of gets shipped off. And
Yeah.
I don't know. I think that towards the more adult years of her life, she became a bit more self-centered. So even her choosing to go to the US, like I feel like she didn't even take Jade into consideration at all. She was just kind of
Mhm.
survival of the fittest kind of mentality, which is understandable during the time, of course, but that was really interesting to me because I felt like when she was younger, she was super selfless. Like she wouldn't even
Yeah.
go to Seoul without Jade. So I think that shows like a character growth as well.
That's so true. Like she went through like the opposite of Luna. Like she grew into what I thought Luna was going to grow into, where she kind of became like this like self-centered, um almost like kind of a brat, because she was always, like you say, like had this competitive thing with Jade, or was jealous of like the acting roles or the singing
Mm-hmm.
roles that Jade would get, or jealous of all of the gifts that Jade would receive, even though Jade like didn't feel there was a competition. It's just like, oh, my
Right.
friend, like we've been friends forever. And then um Lotus gets all excited because she catches the attention of President Ma, and like secretly moves like theaters, and Jade is like, okay, why was it a secret? Like, why didn't you tell me? And then
I thought
feels
we
all
were
good about
close.
herself. Yeah, because she's like, well, I'm the mistress to President Ma, and felt like it was a status thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So her her character arc, I kind of threw me for a loop, but they were also
Definitely.
different.
Yeah, I wish we got a little bit more closure on like maybe an epilogue of what happened to the sisters because that would have definitely been interesting to know. Um
Yeah.
I think overall, something interesting about the book was about how these characters felt really real. Like I don't know if you felt the same, but
Yeah.
I read
Totally.
okay, I I wrote this down. But I found a quote on Goodreads of this review and this person said that they had a hard time getting into the book because the characters in the story were hard to empathize with. But in my opinion, I didn't agree with that because
Yeah.
I think that a lot of times in like media, TV shows, books, characters like these wholesome characters, but it's just not realistic. People are not
Right.
so inherently good or bad. And I think that even with the Japanese generals, you kind of see this other side of them because people, don't wake up one day and just choose to be bad. Everyone
Right.
has different motivations for why they do things. Everyone has different morale. And, that doesn't mean that you're a good or bad person. So for me, I felt like I could empathize with a lot of these characters because even if I didn't agree with what they were doing, I also have not been in their shoes. So I don't know what kind of emotions and mentality they're in.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I thought that too. When I finished the book, it was like I had to remind myself that it wasn't real and that those weren't real characters. And I think that's because one, it was so deeply researched, and two, like no one was so squeaky clean. Like everyone had some skeletons, everyone had some darkness, everyone made some questionable choices, or made like impulsive emotional decisions, or like reflected on them later, because we got like 50 years. So there were times when
Yeah.
like 60-year-old Jade would be like, oh yeah, I used to do this in my 20s. And it's like, well, we read about you from when you were in your 20s. And so we got to see them grow. and then be self-aware about their growth. And that felt, I think, the most real to me.
Yeah, I thought that was absolutely wonderful. Personally, I know some people don't always enjoy reading kind of time jumps, but I felt like it was so necessary for the story to be like fully fleshed out. I felt like we needed to see, when it started and it was really bad there, to, when Korea achieved independence and how it wasn't all perfect after that, just
Right.
historically, because, when Japanese generals in the army were occupying Korea, all of these other groups inside kind of unified because they had a common enemy. And, once Korea gained independence, you would think, oh, everyone's going to be happy now. But all of the little groups inside of Korea start to have some tension. And I was definitely not expecting the ending with Jung-ho,
Oh my God,
especially
yeah.
after the Korea achieved independence. I didn't realize that it was going to be like Koreans who would persecute Jung-ho. So
Yeah, that was heartbreaking, I thought, because in his mind, he was also fighting for Korea. And then after it was all done, it was like he turned into the bad guy in their eyes. But then, I mean,
yeah,
he also did become like pretty extreme, like the whole scene where he like attempts the assassination,
yeah.
which was like, oh my God, like we're going there, okay. And so he definitely got like pretty intense, but even still it was like I didn't expect it to end for him how it did.
I was crying so much because when he was walking and he saw her and people were throwing stones at him, he was just thinking about, wasn't he thinking about the tiger kind of scene about how they were meant to be together and that he would find her in another lifetime and how he was exactly where he needed to be, right? Like he was like
Yeah.
reminiscing, and it was just
When
so beautifully written. The waterworks were flowing that day.
that was when so Jade went to see him in jail, I think. And
Yeah.
he told her about how his father was with those Japanese officers on the mountain when they were lost and they scared a tiger away. And then he tells Jade that his father always kind of thought that tiger was like his mother reincarnated. And so
Yeah.
then like he was explaining like it's okay, I know I had this dream about an hourglass, and he feels very like at peace with everything. And then Jade sees him like being led to execution, and then she has this full circle moment of like, oh, it's like about to end. And then in his POV, he's thinking about how it's full circle because the first time he saw Jade was when she was in like the same place in a parade, and he noticed like how beautiful she was. And so yeah, no, I was crying. That was, I was
That
like,
was so hard to read. And it
yeah,
was also so sad because it came full circle and also shows about ageism and sexism. Because when he first saw her, she was being displayed on stage, right? And she was beautiful. It was like her reveal party where she was coming on to the courtesan scene. And this last scene, she's old and she gets pushed to the side, and someone calls her an old bitch and ignores her, and no
yeah,
one sees her anymore except for
yeah,
him.
yep, yeah. That
That
got
part
me.
hit
That
me.
got me. Hello. 1 degree removed from knowing the author. That is so cool. Nice to meet you, Bonbon, and see you both doing hot girl shit. That's so cool. I commented on the Instagram post and the author responded to my comment.
That's awesome.
Yes, she followed me too, and she follows the book club Instagram. So I'm really glad that I loved the book. I was a little nervous about that. I'm like, oh man, I hope I don't hate it. But yeah, she seems like a really cool person.
Mm-hmm.
I was not that upset about him dying. I wasn't heartbroken that he died, but I was heartbroken for Jade.
Yeah. Well, I think actually I was sad.
Yeah. That's okay.
I didn't think about it for a moment. He definitely was a flawed character in many aspects, and I really didn't like how he handled things when, Jade wanted him to leave and he started destroying
Yeah.
her room. That was a lot. And I could also see how Jade was just trying to be there for him, and that's why she offered to spend the night with him. But I do feel like he matured more since that point when he got older, because he seemed to change, at least with her. So I don't know. It
I
still
thought so
was sad.
too. Yeah, I thought that moment where he like snapped in her room with him, where she's like, I always sensed that there was like some kind of darkness, and then she got to see it, and she's like, okay, yeah, that's why, like, I feel like resistant to being with him. And then later, decades later, we see him like reflecting on that, and like in their conversations, like years and years later, we see how in his mind that moment was like a turning point for him, and how like he learned from that. But yeah, in the moment that was like, whoa, it was like such a shock and like disturbing to read that after he spent his whole life trying to be this perfect man for Jade. And then the moment where she's like, sorry, like I don't really reciprocate, he like totally snapped.
Yeah.
He has a lot of anger. Yes.
Definitely.
And even his mentor would comment on that. Myungbo?
Yeah.
Yeah. Where he would like send him on missions and then would have to like yell at him like, hey, you can't get angry and like cause a scene. You have to just like do the mission. And that was like a constant thing he ran up against.
That's an interesting character that I like to talk about too. I felt like, okay, I am not as educated as I would like to be on communism, and that's something I probably should do some homework on. But it was really interesting to see and read his like viewpoint towards why he would choose to support that Myungbo.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, I think that it, was the author and how she also made, characters kind of likable, not likable, but more understandable for like Japanese
Right.
generals and stuff like that. Like these people are all human. And I don't know enough about it, but I really liked that she painted him out to be a person who is supporting a cause because he believed that it was actually going to benefit the world. And he seemed like a very kind, selfless person. So it was, I don't know, it was nice to read about.
Yeah, I mean that's true. I mean, he even taught Jung Ho like to read and to like he like coached him in like speeches and all of these things that like really took him on. Even later in like his court hearing, they were like, he seems like he treated you as like basically a son. Like they had this like really tight bond. But I think that's true, like what you're saying about how like a lot of the characters, because when we were in like their chapters, even some of like the like Japanese soldiers or like generals, like Yamada especially, every time we got like a clip from him, it was like, wait, like you're not a bad person. You're just in the minds of the Koreans, you're the bad guy. But in his mind, he was just doing his duty. And every time we got to be in his head, we like see how he clearly thinks that he's like a good gentleman. It was like very complex. Like nothing was really black and white.
Exactly. And that was really interesting to me to read about. Another complex character that I want to know how you guys all felt about it was Loaches Betrayal. I was
Oh
so
my
shocked. I did
God.
not see that coming. I felt like they were totally okay. I did not sense any kind of beef. But for Loach to just throw Jung Ho under the rug like that when he was the one who introduced Jung Ho, it was
Yeah.
just, it made me so upset.
I was shocked. And then when I thought about it more, I think it was Loach covering his own ass. Because if he was the first one to be like, yeah, like he dragged us there and he got really into it, then no one could put it on him. Like he's like, because he of course, like Loach was the one who like brought him there and knew him first. But if he made it seem like it was the other way around, then no one would question it later on. And Loach did end up being kind of like this like slimy business guy. Where afterwards I was like, dang, like he really just was like watching out for himself.
That
Yeah.
was
I know.
really
like, wow, you scumbag.
another character development, because in the first maybe 200 pages, you know, when they were still growing up, Loach was all about community and family, and we're all a team, and we're all looking out for each other, and we share what we have. And then he becomes super
Right.
self-centered to the point where he would throw his best friend under the rug like that. That was sad.
Yeah. That was sad, especially because they'd kind of parted ways like long before that, where they had, I think it was at like Loach's business or something, where I think where like Jung-ho goes and is like,
yeah,
oh, like I'm not doing business with you or something. It was like weird, or like not even for you, my oldest friend. And so they kind of were like, okay, I guess our history doesn't really mean anything now. So like you, like I didn't think there was any beef. I thought they just like went their separate ways. But no.
Yeah, that was really sad. The part where everyone kind of that was his best friend back in the day would all gather together and have beer and food, and Jung-ho would just kind of watch them from the sidelines and kind of feel forgotten. Because at that point, I don't think he had a lot of close friends. I think he only had Myung-bo to kind of rely on, because
yeah, I think you're right.
And that was interesting.
Jade, but also, yeah, that was a weird dynamic.
Yeah.
Poor Jade. She was the best. We got to talk about her ending. Are we ready for that?
Yeah, I'm ready for that.
Okay. It was like after Danny died, and then after Jung-ho was executed, where she is like, I literally can't stay in Seoul any longer, and like sold everything. And this felt kind of random to me, the way that she just is like, bye, I'm going to the sea. But I loved it. And she's like, I want to be a sea woman. How did you feel about that whole epilogue to Jade's life?
I don't know if I'm remembering this incorrectly, but I feel like there was a clue that she was going to end up there, because I think I remember at some point someone asked if they had ever been to the sea before. And I think she said, no, but I've always wanted to go, like when she was a kid or something. But I'm having some kind of thing. I don't know if I'm just creating this in my mind.
No, you're right.
But
you're right. I think it was at that cafe where the owner of the cafe is like, yeah, like the most calm place I've ever been is the ocean, where you hear like the ships, like the like symphony that the ships make together. And she's like, that, I don't know, I've never been there. And that like little cafe and the owner of the cafe becomes like such a like safe place for her that I think eventually she was like, I'm gonna go there.
Yeah, that was absolutely beautiful. I thought it was really interesting how she became like a sea woman, or what is it called when you dive in and collect like mussels and abalone? Am I just remembering this incorrectly?
No, I think sea woman. I think you're right.
But that was really interesting to me, and it felt very wholesome. It kind of reminded me of a Studio Ghibli-esque moment where she was making this new life for herself, but everyone underestimated her because of her age and kind of said that she wasn't going to be able to learn how to dive. And she ends up finding a community and respect from the other locals. And they call her like the soul woman or something like that.
Yeah, they called her like city granny or soul granny or something. So I'm like, that's perfect. A woman who dived. And she becomes like a foster mother for this little boy.
Yeah, that part was a little rushed for me just because
I
I felt
agree.
like we like 2 pages, we meet this woman who teaches her how to dive, and then all of a sudden you start to notice that the husband is extremely abusive, and then she runs away, and no one knows where she went, and she adopts this little girl. It was very wholesome, but I wish we got a little bit more with that. I wish, like, we knew where she was going. I wish Jade might
Mm-hmm.
have helped her escape. I kind of felt like there was very open ending, and I know some people like it,
Yeah.
but I kind of like to know at least a general sense of what happened to certain characters. So,
Yeah. I think I agree. Not that I needed to know what happened to her, but just like I wanted a little bit more time with that dynamic. But it kind of just was like, oh, she's got to leave, give the city granny the baby. Okay, that's it. You know, it was
yeah,
like I wanted a little bit more. Okay, yeah, so we're in agreement. But I did love that like Jade finally got to be a caretaker in that way that she hadn't been before, except kind of with like Luna's baby. But she'd never been that nurturer on her own. And she even said at some point, like, I'm not, who did she say that to? That must have been Jungho, where she's like, I'm not upset that I didn't marry, but I wish that I would have had like someone to like share my life with or something along those lines.
she said
And
that to
then,
General Ito on the last time that they visited, and it was when
oh,
their dynamic was completely different, which made me like General Ito a little more. Not that I thought he was a great guy or a nice guy, but it like their conversation was very informational for me. So
yeah,
that's when they were reminiscing a lot, and it seemed that she wasn't as upset by his company at that specific scene because they were much older at that point, and it wasn't as much of a romantic kind of cat chasing the mouse dynamic in that scene.
yeah. I like wanted to be angry at that scene. Like, this guy, like the scum of the earth. And then they had like a pretty normal conversation, which was like
Mm-hmm.
odd, but very real.
And did you catch that? How he said that he had a family home in, did he say Nagasaki or did he say Hiroshima? I
I think
think
it
it
was
might have.
Hiroshima.
Yeah, and so that whole scene, I was wondering if they were going to incorporate that. That was really interesting to me
Yeah.
because he came back, I think, a couple days before the bombing. So,
Oh my God, you're right. Yeah. Yeah.
and it was,
That was
and
wild.
was it Yamada who passed when he was in the forest? Right when he was leading like the troops, and it was against the Russians, right? And then they were heavily outnumbered, and then he started running back.
Yeah. Yeah. Which we had kind of been foreshadowed because one of them was talking to, oh, it was Yamada, I think, when he like pulled aside Jungho after he found like the cigarette case. It was like that like crazy scene. And so he like pulls him into the office and is like, here's a letter. Um, I promised your father that like I would take care of him if he ever brought the cigarette case to me. So like, here you go. Low key, like we're not gonna win anyways. Like we're really outnumbered. It's just that we need bodies. Like we can't just like give up. And that was like, whoa, like you just admitted that to this like Korean kid. And then later, like that was how like his story ended.
Yeah, you can definitely see throughout the story how General Yamada gets super tainted after the war, after fighting for
Mhm.
so many years. It was just crazy to me, and I felt like he was the most likable character
Mhm.
that was representing like the Japanese army. I felt
For
like
sure.
he had the most empathy, even with the Jung-ho's father. But
Yeah.
so I was a little bit sad when he passed, but he seemed at
Yeah.
peace. So
Hmm. Yeah.
yeah.
Um, what else is on my list? What else is on your list? I know that you
So
mentioned earlier there was a story you wanted to tell.
yeah. So I didn't really know the full story for a while, but I recently visited my mom, and this story, I guess, resonates a little bit extra with me because my grandma, so my mom's side is from Malaysia, and the Japanese occupied Malaysia around the same time, like 1940s. And so my grandma actually hid in a hole in the ground during the Japanese occupation, which I think is really interesting.
Wow.
And like she hid it in the ground with her family, but because of that and because of like the fighting and stuff like that, she actually lost her birth certificate. So it got like burned and crossfires and whatever, and so she was never able to get a license or go to school or learn to read. And that's really fascinating to me because you read this
Yeah.
historical fiction novel and you think that, you know, it's from so long ago, but it's
Right.
actually pretty recent. And it was just very interesting because growing up, when my mom would take me to Malaysia to see my grandma, she would read to me these picture books, and I didn't realize until I was older that she couldn't read, and she was just making up the stories for me. So I don't know,
Oh,
this story just kind of resonated a little bit more with me because my grandma also experienced Japanese occupation.
yeah.
So I just wanted to share that.
Wow. No, thank you for sharing that. What a story. And like hiding it in a hole and
Yeah.
like all of like how that affected like her whole life. Like, well, I lost my birth certificate, you know, but oh my gosh.
Yeah. So, anyways, let me see if there's anything else that I wanted to talk about.
Did you have any quotes? I know I have two that I bookmarked that
Okay,
were my
share your
my favorite
quotes.
quotes. They're both like kind of from the end. One is from the interview that Hanchol does with the reporter, where then afterwards he is like, "Oh, I don't have any plans except taking you to dinner." After she interviewed him about like his family,
Oh
which is like,
yeah.
"You sleazeball." But I did like this quote because she asks him about like, "Were you always so confident? Were you always so sure of your own abilities?" This is on 372. And he said, "Oh, confidence isn't something you're born with. If you have it from the beginning, it means you're a fool." A fool, Hancho said slowly, organizing his thoughts. "There are just two things in the world that give you true confidence. One is overcoming difficulties on your own, and the other is being deeply loved. If you experience both, then you will be confident for the rest of your life."
And I think he
And
was
I was like,
probably thinking about Jade.
I know. I'm like, okay. And then to cover it up, he's like, "Can I take you to dinner?" Like, ugh, just admit that you misstrayed.
His
Oh,
character development
that's
was so disappointing.
I know. I'm like, you really are that like scummy man that is just going after money and like screwing over women. Cool.
I really
And then
do
the other one,
believe. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
oh no, go ahead.
Um, I think it's really interesting how, and I'm not saying this is all men, but I feel like nowadays, even a lot of guys, you know, will see someone who's out of their league and then go for this person and then just have the audacity to think that suddenly they're like they place themselves on this pedestal and think that they could do
Yes.
better. And I think that's essentially what happened with Henschel and Jade, because he felt like she was so out of his league that he didn't even know if she was gonna come outside of the theater and want to ride on his rickshaw again.
Mm-hmm.
And then getting to the point where he doesn't want to be with her publicly even. And I honestly think that even though he uses his family's pressure as a reason, I think that he would have ended up in the same place regardless. I think that he would
I think
have,
so too.
because he
Yeah,
did
like
the same
seeing
thing.
how exactly like seeing how he is at like a 60-year-old man still is like, okay, no, like you still would have been two-timing Jade if you had ended up with her, or like even if you didn't have your family to answer to, like you still would have been like a scumbag in that way, I think. But yeah, it was like disappointing because Jade loved him so much. And for Jade to be like for me to feel so strongly about Jade as a character, and then see Jade care so much about this like disappointing man was like, I don't know.
That
like
scene though.
Got the emotions.
Yeah. That scene where they have relations and then she finds out that he's engaged.
Yeah,
and then
that was
in
the
3
night that her
weeks.
aunt died. Yeah.
That
was
was
like,
so sad. That was
that
so
was
sad.
horrible.
Aunt Danny, and
Yeah.
her two loves of her life, and how none of them came to see her before she passed.
Yep.
That just shows like ageism, sexism, because one of them was like, oh, well, she's old now. I don't want to see her in this state. I'm sure she's not beautiful anymore.
Right. It's like the woman's dying. Like, yeah, that was, and the way that Jade like described going into her room and realizing that she had passed was like, it was like such a poetic thing the way it was written. She said something
exactly
like, "Oh,
what
I
you're talking
said,"
about.
yeah, it's like, "Oh, I said good morning," or like, "Here's your breakfast," and like the words didn't land, like they were seeds in the wind, and that's how I knew, because like my words were still like floating. And I thought I had to like close the book and like think about that, because that like was such a unique way of phrasing that, and was so specific and like hit so hard.
No, definitely.
Do you know exactly what I'm talking about?
Yeah,
right?
I'm trying to find it right now. It was so beautiful. Oh, okay, I found it. Reading voice
so
on.
Fast. Yes.
There was something about the way that her words scattered unheard that reminded Jade of the white seeds of plane trees. In the summer, when the sun shone just a certain way, the fluffy particles sparkled like stars in the air, each seed tracing a resolutely different path, although the wind blew only in one direction. Jade once watched for a long time to see if they came down to the ground, and they did not. They just kept floating between the earth and the sky. It was the way her words hung in the air like seeds that let her know that her aunt died.
Yep. That's like beautiful and devastating.
Agreed.
The most beautiful writing. That's the thing. Like, I am stunned that this is a debut. So good.
It definitely does not read like one. And
No.
I don't know if I'm like, I know that I like action-based stories, but there's certain books that, people have been like, oh, the writing is beautiful, and for some reason it just didn't connect with me. This book was so beautifully written and just took me for a spin. Like, I was instantly enraptured by the writing, and it was just a journey.
A journey. My last quote is like literally almost the last line of the book. It's page 399, and it's when Jade is talking about how she found the pearl in her first abalone. Thank you so much, sir. You're gonna go away. She just found her first abalone, and she's like so proud of herself, and she opens it up and there's a pearl, and she's like, in that moment I know that Jung Ho is like watching over me. And then she says, life is only bearable because time makes you forget everything, but life is worthwhile because love makes you remember everything.
That's such a beautiful quote.
Yeah, like instantly I'm like, oh, highlight that one, bookmark that one.
I need to get better about doing that. I completely forgot about this quote, and it's just hitting different again.
I know, it's such a good one. It's like so simple, but so like just gets you in the feels. Oh, this is a perfect place to lead us off. I'd love some historical fiction recs from you. I want to read more now. What do you got?
So I would recommend The Japanese Lover by Isabel Allende. It's about Japanese internment camps and just, this forbidden romance. It's definitely a lot more of a romance-based story, and it's definitely more of a slow build, but it is completely worth it. And if you like romance and you like historical fiction and want to learn a little bit more, because a lot of it's not in history textbooks, I would definitely give that one a read. I also really like The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna, and that's about World War II and Nazi occupation in France, and that's a very beautiful story, and I think it centers around the love of two sisters, and that's probably one of my favorites. I have a very memorable moment where I was sliding down a door crying, and my boyfriend was, thinking we're on this romantic retreat in the snow, and I'm like acting like I'm having a mental breakdown. So those are probably two of my recommendations.
Yeah, and I read those both on your recommendation. So I think both of those, The Nightingale for sure was in the vlog I did of your taste test. And I think I also read The Japanese Lover separately because you recommended it. And both are so, so good.
Do you have any
Hi,
historical
Laura.
fiction?
Let's see what comes to my mind. I would be silly not to mention The Rose Code, even though I think I've talked about that one to death. But that's also a World War II historical fiction set in England, and it follows women intelligence officers, women spies, kind of. But they're at this like intelligence base, secret intelligence base, and doing really cool things. And there's like a layer of mystery and dual timelines, all that good stuff. Also, I recently read City of Girls, which actually I think you would like too, Nicolee, if you haven't read that before.
I haven't.
It's like has similar vibes to Evelyn Hugo, where it's like this old lady like reflecting on her life and telling someone else about her life, being like a young woman in New York City in the early 1900s, and like the antics that she got up to and the lessons that she's learned. And it goes on for like decades. And you're kind of like,
is that by Elizabeth Gilbert?
Yeah.
I just got it for Christmas from my boyfriend's mom, so I'll have to read it now.
Oh my gosh. I feel like you're going to like that one a lot.
Okay, I'll definitely text you my thoughts if that's okay while I'm reading it.
Yeah, for sure.
But I actually bought The Rose Code when I was in California because of you,
Yes.
so I'm excited to read that.
Oh my god. That's one of those that I'm just not going to shut up about, apparently.
And you shouldn't, because it's clearly a great book, and I trust your recommendations to the end of the earth, so.
Aw, it's a good one. Well, I feel like I pretty much got through my list. Did you feel like you talked about all of the things you wanted to talk about?
I guess the last thing that I thought was interesting was just like learning about history, and just I don't know, I really think that there needs to be a lot of rewriting in history textbooks, because there's so much of the world that I don't read about or learn about. And I definitely feel like, first of all, two separate issues, but I feel like history is very like male centric. Like I read Brazen and I was shook with how many impactful women there were out there, and I've never even heard of their names before. But it was really interesting to read about, Japan and Korea and the relationship with the US at the time, and Russia, and that's something that I've never read about. So honestly, I wanted to even, look up in Wikipedia if what I was reading was true, because I just was so caught off guard by everything. Because I've never learned it before. So that was really interesting.
I felt that way too. Like, wow, how did I go my entire school life and like college life not learning about this, or hearing about it only through a very Eurocentric lens of like, oh, European history, and also this was going on in Korea because of how it wove with the Europeans at the time. And it's like, Or same with like American history. Well, American history. Also, they were like briefly involved in this thing that was going on in Korea. That's only interesting because like this was happening in America, and it's like,
yeah.
what? I missed out on all of this history until, ironically, I read like a historical fiction book about it.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that that's something that could use some improvement. And yeah, I had something else I wanted to say. I'm trying to think. My ADHD just spaces me out. But oh,
I
did
can
you
see the wheels
think
turning.
did you think that the first massacre where people that were trying to promote Korean independence were just slaughtered by Japanese officials, and then they went and saw this embassy member and they asked him for help, and then eventually they sent out people to go to the US and ask for help, and they were literally turned away, and like the US didn't care at all to help Korea until
Right.
it got more impacting them and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Do you think that's true? Because I've never learned that either. And I wanted to even, look up if this is a thing, this massacre actually happened. But that was a bit disheartening to read.
I would 100% not be surprised if it were true.
Yeah.
And it seems like one of those very specific details that seems like it would only have to be true. You know what I mean? And that does seem very American to be like, come out, be like, we're going to be the heroes. Except that we're not actually going to do anything, but remember that we said that we would. Okay, bye. And then like leave them to fend for themselves. Yeah, that would not surprise me if that were actually true.
Yeah, that was the last thing I was wondering about. So I'm probably gonna look it up at some point today.
Yeah.
And just kind of see.
Yeah, let me know what you discover.
Okay. But yeah, I think that's everything.
Yeah. Thank you so much for reading with me and discussing with me and being a part of Hot Girl Book Club with me. I had a blast. I love getting your insight on everything.
Yeah, this is a really fun read to talk about. I feel like there was so many different things to talk about.
I know. All of a sudden, I'm like, how has it been an hour already? Like, I feel like it went so fast. There were so many things where we both made a list, and it was like, okay, I want to talk about all these things. So
we were on a mission.
It was definitely a good one for book club. Yeah,
definitely. Well, thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Absolutely. And anyone that wants more historical fiction or fantasy or now romance graphic novels, Nicolee is your gal. Everything is linked in the description below. And next month, February, we will be reading Shallow Waters, and Jela from lalaloveslit will be joining me. So that's February's plans. Woo! Thanks for hanging out with us also, Brooke. I'm glad that you also loved it and were pitching in and talking to us. We'll see you next month, hopefully. And that's it for me. Thank you for watching, hanging out with us. See you next time. Love you, bye.